Hello, everyone, and welcome to this webinar, Empowering Voices and E-Participation in Youth Work. Just to introduce myself, my name is Adam Isawi Helkir. I am French and British. I'm a dual national, and I have completed my studies at university in English literature and language. And I have also been working with my organisation to deliver training on e-participation, digital participation with young people. And in my experience, I have noticed certain things that I would like to share with you today. This is an open dialogue that I would like to have with you all. This is a field which, from my research, I found is constantly changing, constantly evolving. And so that's really what I'd like to emphasise, what I'd like to come from this webinar today. So we can begin with a brief introduction of the content, the material that we will be covering today. First of all, I'd like to introduce concepts and ideas of e-participation and what stage we're at now. Again, this is a constantly shifting frontier. This is something which is moving, changing all the time. I'd then like to move on to the relationship between online and offline participation. This is something which I emphasize here is symbiotic. These are two things which need to go together. And then I'd like to move on to the relationship between e-participation and European institutions and democracy as well. Young people and online platforms are going to play a key role in the upcoming European parliamentary elections this year. And then on to point number 4, which are the challenges and obstacles posed by e-participation. This is not something simple. This is something which we need to contend with. These tools are not totally within our control, so we need to figure out how to harness things for our benefit. And then finally, I'd like to move on to something more practical. 2 case studies, 2 instances of European youth-focused e-participation initiatives. These are 2 very different initiatives that I'm going to cover today, and I'm going to try and explain to you what I thought were the advantages of these initiatives and the negatives. So what came out of these projects, of these experiments. Let's move to the introduction of the concept. So, Marie-Louise Draber, she defines e-participation as interactive online policymaking in action. So this is involvement and participation through internet-based channels, internet-based platforms, and online information. There are 3 main levels that we can discuss. This is what is covered in the academic literature: the local, the national, and the European. Another thing that often academics emphasize with regards to online participation is an equality of voices. And so there are stakeholders at all of these levels, and there are stakeholders at the grassroots level as well, and also at the top. There really has to be a kind of dialogue and a dynamic movement between the top and the bottom for e-participation to work. Moving on to the 2 dimensions of e-participation. Academics say that there are 2 main dimensions: direct online participation, which are here direct structural links to political decision-making, policy-making processes, which enable the influence of individual participants on the formation of policy, the contribution of their ideas, which are then put into practice. And then we have indirect online participation, which is something less direct, of course, a cultivation of attitudes and an inculcation of behaviors through online channels. So here we can talk maybe about projects which try to get people to not maybe think a certain way, but to develop critical thinking skills which then can be applied in a more practical manner. So we discussed this very briefly already. Direct e-participation and indirect e-participation, they have to go together. There cannot be one without the other. The indirect e-participation, which enables people to grow, young people especially, and to develop critical thinking skills, which are vital in the ever-changing world of online information, where there's disinformation, fake news, of course. This indirect participation aids direct participation. Young people especially can develop as direct stakeholders in the formation of policy at institutional levels, at national and European levels. The indirect and the direct are therefore complementary, and that's how we must think of them. Moving on to ideas of whether the internet has helped or harmed youth participation or engagement levels. This is a very contentious topic among academics, and there is real debate about the impact of the internet and of social media on young people, whether it helps them or whether it hinders their participation. But something that we have to consider, and which academics also emphasize, is the ubiquity of the internet in the lives of young people. It's everywhere. Almost every young person now has a smartphone. Almost every young person has some form of social media account. It's here to stay, whether we like it or not. And so when we think about youth work, when we think about youth participation, we have to contend with these tools. We have to foster the active participation of young people by speaking to them directly through these channels if we can. So, youth participation and offline involvement, these two must go together. This is what is emphasized in some academic literature. So Evaldas Rupkus and Kerstin Franzel in 2018 said that there is no online without offline. Therefore, the online does not really serve a purpose unless things are put into practice offline or they're complemented by offline activities. So these offline activities supplement and concretize what is developed online. And so if you want further information on this, you can see the guidelines which have been developed by the Youth Part project and the Youth Part local projects, which were running from 2011 to 2014. Next, let's talk about digital diversification and democracy. So in 2015, Desjardins said that we are witnessing a diversification of the range, the forms and targets of political expression. This has become only more true since 2015. We only have to look at what happened during the COVID-19 pandemic, the rise of online digital activism, the mass involvement of young people across the world, not just in the United States, in the Black Lives Matter movement, for example, in environmental awareness, in green activism. These are movements which have principally unfurled online. The literature on youth participation from the early 2010s especially is very pessimistic about youth engagement, and it's also skeptical of digital tools. It sees them as something which can maybe take power away from youth workers. This, I think, is not the right attitude we have. We must look to the future. And so talking about the future, let's discuss the European parliamentary elections, which are happening, of course, this year. And the last round happened, as we know, in 2019. So during the last round of elections, we saw a turnout increase of 8 percentage points from 2014 to the highest ever rate of 50.6%. And this was in large part due to increased youth voting, which was up by 14%. This, I think, does explode the myth a little bit of youth apathy, of inactivity. And we must, of course, think about this in the context of the rise of digital tools, of social media, of online platforms. So, yes, the 2019 European parliamentary elections. Let's talk about specifically what digital tools were used to engage young people. So the This Time I'm Voting campaign, which had a Snapchat account, garnered 300,000 participants actively promoting European democracy. Of course, people using Snapchat are mainly young. This is a platform which targets teenagers principally. And we also saw a viral video being created for the first time to promote active participation and voting, and to emphasize the importance of voting across the generation specifically. So this video, Choose Your Future, it was entitled, got 34 million views on YouTube alone. It got 113 million views across every single platform, and it was translated into Turkish, Russian, Hindi, Bengali, among other languages, so not just European languages here. And it was very clever what was done to generate involvement, not just from young people, but from people across the generation. So the filmmaker put a scene into the short film which involved an actual live birth. And so this generated controversy. As we know on the internet, things which create discussion, controversy are very important for generating engagement. And I would like to briefly show you this video, which was hailed in 2019 by the British newspaper The Guardian as the first viral EU video.
Today, I'm being born. Like thousands of children all across Europe. What will the world we grow up in look like? What awaits us? Most of us are planned. Some of us are a change of plans. And we've all made an impact on the world even before we're born. Happiness, love, and fear, an overwhelming anxiety, almost unbearable. Maybe because the world around us feels more uncertain than ever. And life has a way to make us feel fragile and alone when we know change is coming and nothing will ever be the same again. Some say that we're born into this world alone. But we're not. From the second we come into this world, we're in it together. And the love in the world grows. For every child born, there's another reason to shape the changing world around us and make an even better future. The challenges we face are global, but together in Europe we can lead the way and reduce climate change, make the borders safe, fight terrorism. Together we can promote peace, equality, rights, and democracy. Each of us can leave a mark, but together we can make a real difference. That's why we vote. Today, I'm being born. Choose the Europe you want me to grow up in.
So I think that the viral success of this video is something that really we can think about, take lessons from, and reflect on. I personally think that it's a really wonderful way to engage people, and not just young people, but people from across different generations and across Europe. So let's think now about where we are going to be this year in relation to the European parliamentary elections, which of course are running from the 6th to the 9th of June. What is being done to engage young people online? The Together.eu platform encourages the sharing of ideas, it hosts debates and also e-learning modules, and allows young people to receive news about youth opportunities. There are things to be said, though, about the lack of engagement on social media platforms in relation to the Together.eu campaign. So on Instagram, the account only has 1,800 followers, which perhaps doesn't reflect the levels of engagement that we would really wish for the upcoming election. So things to think about and to reflect on there. Further challenges to e-participation. We know, of course, that the internet and social media platforms are a real resource for political and social engagement, and young Europeans really do make use of these instruments to inform themselves about social and political issues. Young people are not reading newspapers these days. They are expressing their opinions online, and they are finding out information that they feel relates to them, and they even use online platforms to interact directly with decision makers. For example, in Germany last year, 1/3 of young people apparently used online tools to interact with the authorities in some way. So this is something that EU member states have recognized, and they know that new technologies have the potential to reduce the distance between policymakers and young people and to establish bridges and dialogue. So, further challenges. There are national e-platforms in certain EU countries which are dedicated to encouraging and fostering youth engagement, but they also don't exist in many European countries. Norway, Sweden, Poland, Ireland, Belgium, the Netherlands do lack such platforms. These are big gaps, and these national platforms, they do play an important role in supporting young users' ability to discern the quality of the information which is available to them and to exercise and develop their critical judgment. So, for example, some platforms, they offer live chats with experts on various subjects which give young people reliable information, help them to sift through all of the fake news which is out there, which is very important in helping them to develop their ability to think critically and, of course, to be active citizens and active participants in their community and in national and European institutions. So, further challenges to e-participation. So, some tools have been criticized by academics, policymakers, thinkers for their inability to represent inclusivity and also a lack of long-term impact. These are problems that we are facing. As we know, things are changing all the time, and it's up to us to try and keep these tools as up-to-date and as relevant and engaging as possible. So, active European youth participation in general in policymaking is ideally seen as a, quote, participatory bottom-up process. This is how the Council of the European Union, for example, defines the European Youth Dialogue. And so national e-participation platforms are still rather top-down. They perhaps don't engage grassroots groups or individual young citizens as much as they should. They are somewhat didactic. They seek to teach people, to talk to people, and they maybe don't always take on the voices of young people or elevate them in the way that they should online. Moving on. So, developing e-participation as a priority. It is, I believe, something very important, and this is what is emphasized across the board at every level of European policymaking. Disinformation and the spread of fake news have been massively publicized, especially since 2016 in the wake of Brexit and the election of Donald Trump in the United States. And so information which is not reliable is often presented in very persuasive and seductive ways on a range of social media platforms, from Twitter, now known as X, through to Instagram, Reddit, TikTok, etc. As well as this, we have seen a rise in extremists, religious and political extremists using online platforms. They are often very adept at it to recruit and radicalize young people. Young people are, of course, especially vulnerable to this given, well, first of all, their age, and second of all, the fact that they use online platforms far more than older generations do. So Dimitris Avramopoulos, who was the European Commissioner for Migration in 2019, said, quote, "The internet is now the most significant battleground for terrorist action. This emphasizes the importance of reclaiming the internet as a space to develop young people rather than letting them being led astray, for example, by extremists, by populists, by people with extreme ideas." So, blurred lines. Let's think a bit about that. Since the COVID-19 pandemic, the online landscape has been revolutionized. Lines between real life and between the online world are being blurred every single day. So one study found that after the pandemic and during the pandemic, young people were much more likely to interact with their real friends in real life in the same way that they would parasocially, for example, with celebrities online by commenting on their posts. The virtual world is increasingly seen as an attractive escape from real-life problems for young people, especially young people who feel excluded or who do not feel like they are participating in their communities or who feel apart from their peers, for example. So, online grooming is therefore a massive problem which is being thought about and dealt with by policymakers at the European level. The internet is, as Avramopoulos said, a battleground. This constant evolution puts young people at the forefront of the digital world. And so, for example, a 2021 European Commission report about extremism being spread on video game platforms discusses how it is even now too early to draw conclusions from initiatives designed to combat it. This is a landscape which is always changing. But for example, one German NGO, which is called Amadeo Antonio, uses digital tools to combat disinformation directly on gaming platforms. They are trying to reclaim online spaces and use them in positive ways. And equally, the Dutch police do have a scheme where users play online video games with the police in order to spark positive dialogue. And these are, as has been said by others, promising steps in the right direction. We need to try and keep ourselves at the forefront of this development and evolution. Finally, I'd like to discuss two projects which have really pioneered e-participation and which provide us with important lessons to learn about the future of digital e-participation and how young people relate to it. So, the first project that I would like to look at is a more conventional one. It is the Youth Wiki platform, which was developed as part of the European Youth Dialogue, of course, formerly the Structured Dialogue, and which functions as a centralized information hub for information on youth policies in the European Union and partner countries. And so what it does is it provides in an accessible way information regarding education, employment, health, social inclusion and youth policies. And there's a simple user interface which is designed to be accessible, friendly, etc., and which should ideally encourage young people to find out more about the policies which shape their lives and which affect the world around them. So here you can see the interface. We have 5 large buttons which can be pressed. We have countries, so the participating countries and their pages involved in the project. Policy fields, so themes, topics addressed in youth policy making. Comparative overviews, interactive maps, which I think are really good, which allow users to click on them and discover what youth policies and programs are in effect in these countries. And EU cooperation in youth policy. So the Youth Wiki project in the European context. And finally, comparative reports, a collection of comparative reports comparing youth policies in different countries. Again, all very useful information, which I think can help the education of young people. And here you can see the comparative overviews, the map, which can be clicked on and which people can use to find out more about voluntary activities, participation, social inclusion in different countries, education, training, employment and entrepreneurship, and finally youth work. So, drawing together civil society and institutions, that's what the Youth Wiki seeks to do. It seeks to empower young people, give them knowledge to make up their own mind on issues so that they can actively engage in person. Again, bridging the gap between the offline and the online. Jan Linhart and Laszlo Papp say that such projects seek to, quote, bridge the gap between top-down and bottom-up participation and to foster active citizenship. The only problem is it's difficult to know how widely used the platform is. Its promotion online, I think, has been rather minimal, has not received massive amounts of engagement on social media platforms. So that is something to think about. And also it does remain a rather top-down form of education. It's something where information is being given to young people and youth organizations are involved as stakeholders, but we perhaps don't hear the voice of individuals as much as we should. Moving on to the final part of this presentation, the 2 case studies that I would like to look at, which I think are instructive, which we've already covered one of. The final one is Edge Riders, which is a very unusual project which has kind of captured the imagination of academics who are writing about e-participation, as well as journalists. It received quite a lot of media attention, this project, and there are lessons to draw from this project, which is almost a kind of experiment in e-participation and youth work. So, first of all, introducing the origins of the Edge Riders project. This project began in 2011, funded by the Council of Europe and the European Commission, and it was founded on principles of horizontalism. It was designed to promote non-institutional dialogue among young people and help them to make use of online tools in order to foster dialogue and to promote young people's kind of like tech-savvy abilities. So, for example, hacking and the creation of open source frameworks online. So the idea was to use the internet to create a kind of decentralized network for discussion. But there was also a more practical, real-world application, which was the aim to promote understanding between institutions and individuals. To quote the Edge Riders, learning does not have to be top-down. In relation to this, the project created what they called the Edge Riders Guide to the Future, which is a very interesting document in which they lay out their ethos and what they want to achieve with the project. So, this is a project which was really kind of bottom-up as well as top-down. The funding for this project ended in 2013, and the Edge Riders assumed a life of its own as a project and initiative once this funding came to an end. And so in 2013, the Edge Riders Network, had 2,000 young tech-savvy people involved who were, albeit mainly from Western European countries, and they decided that they would create a new project called Unmonastery, which was designed to be a real-world application and continuation of the discussions and activities which they began online. The main aim of it was to create open source infrastructure for the community, but as a community being together. So, Unmonastery, where did it lead to? It led to a city in the south of Italy called Matera. Ben Vickers, who was at the time a key figure in the Edge Riders project, met someone called Ilaria Dauria in 2013. And Dauria was working at the time on the southern Italian city of Matera's bid for the 2019 European Capital of Culture. And so they put their heads together and they managed to secure funding from Matera's city council, who gave them 35,000 euros, and they agreed to lease a disused monastery to the group for them for 4 months to foster activities and to give them a space to create this unmonastery, as they call it. It was what the Edge Riders called applied e-participation. This is really what policymakers and academics are talking about when they say that the offline should complement the online. So, what came of the Unmonastery project? A lot of attention from media and academia. If you look up the literature on e-participation, academics are talking a lot in the European context about the Unmonastery project. As well as this, you can see here on this slide that major media outlets such as The Nation, the American periodical, and the alternative magazine Dazed covered the Unmonastery project. They were very interested by the ideas that were being developed there at the time. Media attention is one thing. What impact did they have at the local level and at the European level? So, there are lessons to be learned here. The Edge Riders were, in theory, embodying the real-world application of e-participation recommended by policymakers and experts, as we have discussed. But in practice, this was not so simple. So they tried to create about 30 different projects. One of their main projects in the framework of the Unmonastery initiative was called Untransit. This was an app to check bus schedules in the city of Matera, where they were based. Unfortunately, local residents did complain that the public funds that were being given to Unmonastery were not being used in the way that they wanted to. They resented the fact that public transport wasn't, as they were seeing it working well, and that money was being given to develop an app which they thought that they would never use. One resident in 2014 said to Today's magazine of the Unmonastery people, "We never trusted them." So they also failed, beyond Matera, to establish a wide-scale network. They remained mainly Western European. They did not expand their network as they wished to. So, more lessons from the Edge Riders experiment. There were intergenerational tensions in Matera when they were there. So, older people did not understand what they were doing, and they were not as engaged with the community as they wanted to be. And this, of course, speaks to wider tensions between generations and differing levels of digital literacy. Young people who are, of course, in general, more adept with digital tools, and older people who perhaps feel alienated from this new world which is opening up. Also, this was a post-2008 climate in the wake of Occupy Wall Street and movements against anti-austerity, which have since been replaced by other things. These movements are basically dead now. There were successes, however. They did manage to organize about 30 events, including large-scale hackathons, and they set up a programming framework for kids, an open tech school. They were able to map the city's transit system and upload it to a framework called OpenStreetMap, and they did attempt to prototype open source wind energy projects in the city. They also acted as a Kaisi think tank for the city's winning European City of Culture bid. They were important in that, and that cannot be denied. Okay, and now another good practice that I would like to present is a project, Youth Empowered to Change the World, which ran from January 2022 to December of 2023, a 24-month project which was implemented by 6 partners from Serbia, Italy, Lithuania, Jordan, Tunisia, and Bosnia and Herzegovina, a project which sought to correspond with the direct needs of young people and offers concrete knowledge, tools, and PAR methodology, that's participatory action research, in order to empower them to be social catalyzers of the changes in their communities and enhance the participation level in the societies in which they live. This project was funded by the European Union and the Capacity Building Initiative. So, specific objectives were to develop participants' understandings of PAR methodology and how it can improve participants' own and their organizational practices in the field of youth participation and engagement. Something very important which came out of this research was the importance of digital tools, especially online videos and social media platforms like TikTok, Instagram, etc. So another objective aim was to promote participatory action research methodology to support sustained youth participation in democratic life and to strengthen this youth participation and engagement initiatives. And finally, the project supported young people's socio-political development and psychological empowerment, allowing them to really understand the roots of the problems facing their communities and to empower them with the skills and motivation to take PAR action as agents of positive change and to put things into action. And finally, to conclude and to close this presentation, I'd like to bring up some things which I have reflected upon and which I think can also give you food for thought with regards to youth participation, e-participation. These are questions, these are things for you to consider, to spark conversation with. So, something that's very important to think about is the fact that in certain countries there is censorship. Democracy is not structured in the same way that it is in most countries in the European Union or in Europe in general. Do we have freedom of speech in general, or do we have more freedom of speech online? What can these spaces offer us? How can they promote the voices of young people and allow people to express themselves maybe more freely than they can in real life? And in turn, how do people at the institutional level, politicians, perceive digital participation? Do they like it? Do they maybe find it damaging to what they are trying to do? Is it seen as a threat? It certainly is. I think in some countries it's not universally perceived in a good way. And these digital spaces that young people especially should be using in order to express their voices, who is supposed to take responsibility for them? Are schools or civil society supposed to promote e-participation? Or is it something that should happen spontaneously? Is it a mix of both? Or can we bridge the divide between the institutional and the non-institutional informal contexts? Speaking of divides, I'd like also to think about the digital divide. Not everyone is connected to the internet. Older people are excluded in certain ways from the internet. The United Nations has said that the internet is now considered to be a basic component of human rights and people's access to the world around them. We all have to be connected these days, especially in Europe, in countries which are more developed. A lot of people are cut off from things if they don't have proper access to the internet. And what are the relevant topics that people debate in digital communities? I'd like us all to think about what people debate in our communities, in our countries, and also at the European level. And how can young people especially discuss politics in digital spaces? What methods are there? What methodologies, what platforms do young people discuss politics? Are they as apathetic as we think? Or are they in fact involved? Or are they not involved? These are all contentious questions. Speaking of involvement, we also must think about the role of digital participation and social networks in sparking the Arab Spring, for example, revolutions across the Mediterranean, which were fueled by young people and their use of social media. They were able to spread their message faster than anyone has ever really been able to do before. This is something to consider, like the power of people to resist through the internet, to stand up to censorship, to autocracy, to dictatorship, to anti-democratic regimes, for example, and to expose things which violate their rights. And also, let's think about what forms of digital participation we have in our communities. Who is involved in what way? What social media networks are there? What platforms are there? Are they sufficient? Does more need to be done, for example? And also, what is the level of e-participation in your community? Is it uniform across the board? Does it vary by age group, by class, by political affiliation? Are some people's voices elevated above others? Do some people speak louder than others? Are some people trapped, for example, in echo chambers? Do they not hear other opinions in the way that they maybe should? These are all questions that I think can spark conversation from this webinar and give you all food for thought and also material to discuss. These are all important questions, I think, and I hope that you find them as thought-provoking as I do. So, finally, conclusions. One thing that has been emphasized by me across this presentation is that the field of e-participation is important because it's always changing and it's taking up more and more space, especially in the lives of young people. This is important to emphasize. And the second thing to emphasize is that this is not something to be afraid of. We just have to contend with it. We have to think about it, and we have to learn how to appropriate this landscape and to find space to give people, young people especially, directly the information that they need, and also to empower them in creating policy. Thank you. That's the end of this presentation. Thank you very much for your attention, and I hope that you found this useful and that it will spark further conversations, discussions, and thoughts.